On today's show, final takeaways from Rockets training camp, the importance of the double big lineup, as well as Reed Sheppard's growth and development. Plus, Rockets basketball is back, the first preseason game against the Atlanta Hawks. What do we want to see in preseason game one? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston Rockets basketball is back today, and we are so excited about it here at Locked On Rockets. What is up? And welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. On today's show, we're going to be sharing our final takeaways from Houston Rockets training camp, as well as our hopes and expectations for what we want to see out of preseason game number one against the Atlanta Hawks. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, $5 only. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head to FanDuel.com right now to get started. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now is your weekly co-host, the Podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Blue Sky at Ben DuBose. And Ben, it feels like we learned a good deal about this Rockets team headed into this first preseason game against the Atlanta Hawks all throughout training camp. Little tidbits, little pieces of information here and there. And that's what we're going to talk about here on today's show, kind of getting into some of our bigger takeaways from Rockets training camp, as well as a little bit later on what we ultimately want to see, or hope to see, I should say, out of this first preseason game against the Hawks. So I'll let you tee things off. What was maybe your biggest takeaway, or one of your biggest takeaways coming out of Rockets training camp?
The biggest one for me is easily the commitment to the double big. This is not a short-term gimmick. This is now a core philosophy of this team, and they have doubled and tripled down on it this offseason. I mean, when they brought in Clint Capela from the Atlanta Hawks and they signed Steven Adams back, it was pretty clear then. But then when you look at the jumbo lineups as a whole that they're able to run now, I think you would acquire Kevin Durant no matter what, because he's Kevin freaking Durant. But Kevin Durant is tailor-made for a team like this that wants to run double big, because the one limitation and the reason most teams don't do it, even if you're bigger, even if you rebound more, well, you have to play zone to overcome the lack of agility, and you're probably going to get torched from the perimeter. Well, it didn't happen here last year in large part because of Jabari Smith Jr. You can run a very long, agile guy at the three that offensively can also provide value as a floor spacer to prevent things from getting too clunky. And defensively, that space you have to make up for on the perimeter because of the two big bodies that are closer to the rim. Well, when you have a super long arm guy at the three and potentially Amen Thompson at the two, you can overcome that in a hurry. And now you add Kevin Durant, one of the best shooters in NBA history, probably the best at his height, and you did it while keeping Jabari Smith. I respect the Rockets for doubling and tripling down. Clint Capela is the easy one to point to because it reinforced the ability to run double big in basically every game, even when Steven needs a night off because he's in his 30s and he needs to be load managed at times. But now to have Jabari Smith and Kevin Durant to be able to run that zone with length across the board, even Amen Thompson at point guard, with Fred VanVleet going down, it's probably even more important now to lean into the double big. It feels like they're doing that. We heard that at Saturday's practice. I talked to Clint Capela about playing with Alperen and Sengun, and he thinks it's going really well, pointed to Alpe's passing ability is unlocking some new things for him. It's just when you talk to everybody, not just the bigs, not just the coaches, but the other pieces like KD and Jabari, everyone seems bought in on this. And I give a ton of credit to the Rockets organizationally because I don't think it's necessarily Rafael Stone's core basketball philosophy. As he said in one of his interviews, if it was, he wouldn't have waited until late last season to do it. But once they found that market inefficiency, it almost feels like the Moneyball concept in baseball, in that it's so tough to be the best team out of 30. When you think you found an advantage, you've got to really buy in and just go in wholeheartedly. And that's what it feels like they've done. They think this is their edge, and there are no guarantees that it's going to work. Obviously, the sample size at the end of last year in one playoff series is pretty limited, but I give Rafael Stone a lot of credit for saying, hey, even if this isn't necessarily the way I drew it up, this gives us an edge. This is what the data is showing us. And so they have completely bought in on it. And if nothing else, I respect the courage and the conviction with which they're going about it.
Honestly, yeah, it's almost, you go back to thinking about like the Daryl Morey era Rockets when they identified, they were like, all right, well, you know what? Our best way to win right now is to lean into Russell Westbrook and to lean into the spacing that we need around him. And that means, unfortunately, playing, pocket Rockets, right? And going super small and running PJ Tucker at center. And
ironically, that led to Clint Capela leaving Houston, and this brings him back.
Exactly. So it's almost like, they went uber small at one point in time because of the convictions of Daryl Morey and trying to maximize the return on what Russell Westbrook could provide to this team at one point in time back in the day. And now they're leaning into the size and, the double big, or I guess at this point, the triple big, the Monstars lineup, whatever we want to call it. Yeah. So, I do agree with you there that it very much feels like this is something that was kind of built, or the team was kind of built around, catered to this idea. And the more that I think about it, Ben, the more I keep coming away feeling like, Ime Udoka's talked about the 4 penciled in starters that he has. We keep, scratching our brains. Who's going to be that 5th starter based on Josh Okogie talking about, Tari Eason for 6th man of the year. Maybe that bit was a little bit of a spoiler there. So it kind of feels like it's coming down to one of Reed Sheppard or Steven Adams. And the more that I think about it, Ben, I feel like there's a lot of evidence that just points to this Rocket team is just going to lean all the way into Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun and Jabari Smith Jr., that 3-man lineup that was so incredibly effective with one another last season. You've got Clint Capela to be able to back up Adams as like an actual part of the rotation, not just a 3rd string center buried in the depth chart the way that Jock Landale was, but an actual contributing member of the team that can contribute to the defensive identity of things, can provide a change of pace in the sense that he is a vertical spacing big. He's a more of a defensive oriented big compared to Sengun or Adams. He provides a different dynamic on that side of the floor. I keep coming away thinking that when we get to opening night against the OKC Thunder, or maybe even sooner than that, when we see hopefully the first dress rehearsal on one of the 2 road preseason games, that I feel like we're going to see Steven Adams in the starting lineup, man.
I think they'll experiment with it. I still lean to Reed because I think if it's close, they'll go with the template that has obviously more long-term upside, because there's a reason Reed was drafted at number 3 overall, but also something that's more sustainable over the years. Certainly, they hope Reed will be the long-term point guard here. You also think that Fred VanVleet is going to come back at some point, hopefully by the playoffs, but realistically by next season, I think. And so if it's close, I could see the tie going to the more traditional lineup simply because of the sustainability argument. But yeah, they're going to give the double big a real look in preseason. I think they'll at least start it once or twice. And I think the Dorian Finney-Smith injury to start the year plays into it more, because when you look at the rotation, so there were 9 guys going back to, when this team was whole, before Fred got hurt, before we knew about Dorian not being ready for the season. There were 9 guys, the 5 projected starters, plus Tari, DFS, Steven Adams, and Reed Sheppard at that time, we thought off the bench. And so when one guy goes out, somebody has to come in. And so Fred going out, that bumps up Aaron Holiday. Now, Aaron Holiday isn't going to play the 30 minutes that Fred was. He'll probably play like 15, but he'll be that next body. And then the other 15 will be some combination of obviously Reed, Tari, Steven, etc. With Dorian, I think it's pretty clear being around the team at training camp, and you can correct me if you think otherwise, Jackson, but I think the next man up is actually Clint Capela. And so I think Dorian being out, in terms of who that 9th man is going to be, I'm not saying they're not going to play Jae'Sean Tate or Josh Okogie, someone like that. But I think in terms of the hierarchy, and we know Ime Udoka is a trust guy, even if the lineup looks a little clunky, he has certain guys that are in his circle of trust. Going outside that initial 9, when Fred went out, the next guy in the circle of trust was Aaron Holiday. I think with Dorian going out, at least for the start of the year, I think the next guy is Clint Capela. And so that could maybe tip the scales a little bit towards Steven, because it is easier to play that 3rd center if you're starting 2 of them. So that's just a little thing. But while my guess is if it's close, it'll go to Reed, the fact that DFS is out and now you need to find some way to play Clint Capela, that might make it to where the rotations are a little bit easier to pull off if you start both Alpy and Steven.
Coming up, we're going to keep running with our takeaways from Rockets training camp, as well as expectations for the first preseason game against the Atlanta Hawks. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is building for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach peak performance. Peloton IQ system offers real-time strength coaching. It actually tracks your reps, suggests the right weights, and corrects your form, making every rep safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, continuing our kind of takeaways from camp here so far, I think one thing that really has stood out to me is just, this Rockets team, I know that, both publicly and kind of, behind closed doors, some of the conversations that I know that I've had, that I believe you've had maybe as well, is just that, there's this belief in Reed Sheppard moving forward and that he's ready for kind of taking the next step. And that they fully, they weren't, I guess, worried about him much to the, to the way, I guess, that a lot of Rockets fans were publicly about like his performance in Summer League and things like that, and worrying about him, being a bust after one season where he really wasn't even given that much of an opportunity to begin with, unfortunately. And I know that, I've already had plenty of commenters who were like, you can't buy into the preseason hype and, media availabilities and players gassing up other players. But I do think there's something there to the idea that the Rockets wouldn't have been this committed to Reed Sheppard. They wouldn't have labeled him untouchable in the Kevin Durant trade talks if they weren't truly bought in on what he could be and his, eventual future impact for this team. And albeit, again, some of this was pre Fred VanVleet injury, but even then, right, Reed was expected to take on a bigger role. He was expected to be one of the 9 best players on this roster, directly backing up Fred VanVleet. And now with the Fred situation happening, Reed is going to be given an even bigger opportunity to showcase his talent, whether that be in a starting capacity, whether that be coming off the bench. But one of the kind of interesting, storylines to follow this season is just going to be, obviously, how does Reed perform? And ultimately, is this almost, I don't want to say a blessing in disguise, but it kind of feels like, right, the team has a bit of a lower floor without Fred VanVleet, but they have a significantly higher ceiling, because if Reed hits the way that they hope and believe that he can, if Amen hits the way that they hope and believe he can as a primary ball handler, then the ceiling of this team is exponentially higher than it would have been just relying on Fred VanVleet for 30 plus minutes a night.
Yeah, and I really like the way Tim McMahon put it on the Hoop Collective podcast the other day regarding Reed Sheppard's rookie season, which is that if you're worried about his shooting, don't. It's going to be fine. They have a ridiculous amount of data. They have way more intel than we could ever dream of on the outside regarding his shooting. There's a reason why he was called a generational prospect from a shooting perspective going into the 2024 draft. So with more opportunities, that's going to normalize. You should not be concerned there. And that's where I see so much, misguided concern. People point to the lagging efficiency last year. No, that's just small sample size theater. And he had a tough time cracking the rotation for a team that was already winning at a high level. Look, the blessing in disguise this year, he's going to play a lot. In some ways, it doesn't matter if he starts or comes off the bench, because I mentioned the 9-man rotation that they were expecting to have going into this season. Well, that 9 has been cut to 7 with the Fred and DFS injuries. So I know we can talk about them, sliding up Clint Capela and Aaron Holiday and any other veterans, but no, there's clearly a tier gap there. And so amongst the 9 they thought they had, they only have 7. So if you're in that initial 7, you're going to have every opportunity to play and then some. And so for Reed specifically, I do think his role was tough to slide into, say, 10 to 12 minutes per game, which is basically the only real look he got last year as a rookie. And sure, we can point to, defensive side of the ball. Obviously, he needs to get better to play for Ime Udoka. We can talk about, is he strong enough? And he does, to me, Jackson, look a lot thicker. I think everything we heard about him being in the weight room this offseason seems to be translating based on everything that I've seen and heard. But offensively, I do think for someone of his archetype, it's important for him to have a long leash, because if the shots don't go in, he needs to be able to keep shooting. It's like, this is a bad memory, but think back to Steph Curry in Game 7 back in the spring. His numbers in the first half of that game were terrible. but he kept shooting. And by the end of the game, not only did his team win, but his overall stat line was pretty damn efficient as well. And the idea is that, hey, you're an all-time shooter, keep shooting, and eventually it's going to normalize. And even if you're an all-time shooter, if you're shooting, if you're a small guy and you're primarily shooting from three, you're going to have some nights where it doesn't start your way. And if you play 30, 35 minutes, yeah, you keep shooting and it's going to normalize. Well, if you're only playing 10 or 12 minutes, you're not going to go like 1 of 9 and tank the game for your contending level team by yourself, especially at 20 years old in your first NBA season. And so what happened a lot last year, if Reed didn't have a good start his first 2 or 3 minutes, he would get timid. And I think overall it was bad for his development. This year, he's going to have no choice but to let it fly. And so if he lets it fly and does it without giving an F, to go back to one of those media day quotes, I think that's going to be much better for his development. And I think it's going to lead to much better results because there's a lot of data that suggests the shooting is going to be there if he just continues to shoot. We saw it in the one summer league that he totally played this year against the Clippers. He started slowly in that, and he had that turbo nuclear stretch in the second half, and before you know it, the overall stat line looked pretty good. I think the same thing is going to happen if he plays an expanded role in the NBA, and I think it's largely why in those 3 games he actually started last year and played 30 minutes, his stats were really good because he kept shooting. He wasn't timid. That's the blessing in disguise here. He's going to be able to let it fly without having to, hyper analyze every possession the way that you inherently do when you're only playing like 10 minutes a game.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I don't give an F.
I
know it was about Amen, but it applies to Reed too.
Such an all-time quote. That was media day was so funny because of that. Shout out to Michael Shapiro. Great job there. Also, I'm going to give myself a little bit of a producer credit on that because Shapiro was referencing the answer that DFS gave to my question. And so like it was trickle down effect to be able to get to that quote eventually on this soundboard.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I don't give an F.
So good. All right, Ben, what else did you feel like you learned about this team or took away from training camp?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to answer that because I feel like until the games start, everybody is universally positive. But I will say,
everybody's healthy. Everybody's in the best shape of their career.
Yep.
It's all sunshine and rainbows until we play a game. And then it's like, crap.
Yeah. But I do think just around the entire organization, there seems to be a lot more confidence in Jabari Smith Jr. Everyone you talk to will tell you that he's been basically linked at the hip to KD ever since Kevin got to town. I think that's going to be good for him. Obviously, they have a prior relationship even before Kevin got traded here in June. They've worked out together before. Not going to say that they're identical players. That's putting way too much on Jabari, but there are some similarities in the archetype when you talk about a 6'10", 6'11" forward with range out to the three-point line. And, Kevin, when he entered the league, while his handle was certainly better than Jabari's, it's not what it is now. He developed over the years. And so the idea, it's not that Jabari is going to become Kevin one day. No, that's expecting way too much. But just as Kevin improved his handle and got better at finding ways to get that shot off over his years in the NBA, Jabari can make a little bit of progress on that front as well. And so really, ever since camp started, to me, it's felt like Jabari is one of the leaders of this team. In some ways, I think with Fred and Dylan not here, I've sort of wondered who's going to fill that vocal leadership void from losing 2 veterans that really Ime brought in to reset the culture in 23. And I know he's just 22 years old, but it is his 4th season. He's been here a while. It feels like Jabari is becoming one of those guys. He's very vocal. A lot of guys around the team look up to him. And so I don't know what it'll mean from a numerical standpoint. I'm not going to say Jabari's going to have a breakout year simply because there's so many mouths to feed. I'm not sure how many shots he's going to get, but I think it's going to be his best season yet. And I think he is clearly going to be a winning NBA player this year.
And it certainly feels like too, I do love that Ime Udoka, because look, you look at Jabari, total consummate pro, right? Just like got benched last season after coming back from his injury, didn't pout, didn't mope, just accepted his new role, tried to help the team in any way that he possibly could, went into the off season, continued to build and work on his game and came in and we heard from him at media day, right? That he's expecting to start, but that, by no means was there a level of like, did he feel, I guess, like entitled to that starting role. He just felt like that he has earned it, that he's deserved it, or that he is capable of being a starter. And so for Ime Udoka to go that route to confirm, yes, Jabari is one of my starters. I think you could you could maybe like try to, read between the lines here and be like, well, if Fred wasn't hurt, then Fred would just be the fifth starter. And then he would have just gone with this lineup anyways. Right. And that would have been your starting five with all that length. And then just Fred VanVleet rounding out the rest of the five. Maybe the dynamics would have been a little bit different if you went with Fred at the one, and then maybe somebody else would have had a shot to be in the starting lineup over Jabari. Maybe it would have been DFS if he was ready to start. Maybe they still would have potentially entertained the double big lineup with Steven Adams. I don't know, but ultimately, I like the vote of confidence from Ime in Jabari, because we've seen Jabari do so much and shoulder a lot of kind of the dirty work, the unspoken stuff, the stuff that's not necessarily, it doesn't show up in the box score, that kind of thing. And I will go so far as to say I think he has a breakout season, maybe not in the ways that people think of a breakout season, like, oh, he's going to become a 20 point per game scorer or something like that. But I fully expect to see a version of Jabari that continues to build on the defensive impact that we saw last season. He's going to continue to be a great weak side, rim deterrent, weak side shot blocker, great rebounder, versatile defender, guarding multiple positions on the floor. Now by necessity, because they're going to be so big out there, he's going to have to oftentimes guard players that are smaller than him on a more consistent basis than he did previously. And then offensively, get that 3-point shooting number up to that 37, 38, 39, maybe 40% range that we kind of were hoping that he would hit when he was originally drafted. And by working in conjunction with KD every single day of the week now, I expect to see a Jabari that is a little bit more confident and comfortable in what he's doing on the floor, especially from an offensive perspective. And, by no means am I expecting him to become like a go-to scorer, a guy that the Rockets are, drawing up plays for consistently or whatever, but even just 2 or 3 more buckets a game of him just being a bit more similar to how Dylan Brooks never really had a play drawn up for him, but would just take advantage of a mismatch or a smaller defender or whatever. If Jabari can just capitalize on moments like that and get himself up to, 14, 15 points a game, that kind of thing, that makes a world of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's the guy who's easiest to project because he's so comfortable, even if he's not getting the ball consistently. Tari's talked about wanting a bigger role, more minutes, more opportunities. And, there's a world where that happens, but because there are so many mouths to feed on this team, it's not guaranteed that it will. It's a little bit tougher to actually make it work. With Jabari, because he's so plug and play and he fits in a variety of constructs, I feel very confident saying that no matter what, assuming he's healthy, he's going to take a leap this season. It feels like he already has. From a leadership standpoint, his body continues to get better. But I just think we're going to see a much more confident, a much more decisive Jabari. In some ways, last year, he might have been looking over his shoulder with Amen Thompson on the rise in the first half of last season. And then, the difficulty of going to the bench. Well, now he's going to be entrenched as a starter. His role is going to be simplified because obviously having KD, Amen, Sengun out there, they're going to be the primary playmakers. I think it's going to be a much more decisive Jabari. Everybody knows what his role is going to be, including, most importantly, Jabari himself. And he can just go out and be a star in that role.
Coming up, what do we want to see out of the Rockets' first preseason game against the Atlanta Hawks? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss out on. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, $5 only, and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. You just pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. And look, FanDuel is great because it gives you so many different ways to play. You can build out different parlays, you can try different player props, or even follow the live betting lines during games. Maybe you're not into all that and you want to just keep it simple. Head on over to FanDuel and take a look at the outright betting favorites for this year's Super Bowl. Right now, the Bills at plus 420, the Eagles plus 650. You have the Lions at plus 800, the Packers at plus 850, and then in fifth place, the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 950. So for all those odds and so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. And Ben, I failed us because I made you go change into our iconic Margarita Monday shirts just because it's a Monday and the Rockets are playing basketball for the first time in months again. Yes, it's preseason basketball. We're getting hyped for it nonetheless. So yes, we are rocking our Margarita Mondays here in honor of the Rockets playing basketball on a Monday on this edition of LOR. Just completely buried the lead on that one. Although if you were watching, obviously you can see us on YouTube. We're rocking the shirts and we're rocking them proudly. All right, Ben, Rockets versus Hawks. What are you hoping to see? Give me your first thing that you want to see.
So I'm going to skip over the guys we've already talked about in the first two segments, because the double big, Reed Sheppard, those are obvious storylines, and we've already discussed them to a large extent. What I'm actually going to be watching the most for, besides the obvious of, man, it's going to be amazing seeing Kevin Durant in a Rockets jersey at Toyota Center for the first time. That's too easy as well. I actually want to see what Tari Eason looks like entering year 4. Because Tari, over the past week, he's talked a big game. He wants more minutes. He wants more opportunities. He wants a bigger role. That's great. I love the confidence. And he doesn't have a contract extension yet, in contrast to Jabari. So he's got a lot of incentive financially to have a big year. I think after the injuries he's had the last 2 years with the lower leg, he says that's basically in the rearview mirror. He feels a ton better, way stronger. He's talked a big game. He has every reason to be confident. Go out there and show it. You know, there were times the last 2 years when he was finishing games in place of Jalen Green, and we were talking about him potentially being like a poor man's Kawhi Leonard with some of the playmaking that he showed and some of the ability to create on those bully ball drives. What can he do now that he is healthy? He knows it's a big preseason. Quite frankly, the window, this is when it's most open leading up to October 21st, that deadline going into the regular season. So it's a big preseason for him to sort of make his last case to the Rockets for an extension. And, you know, as mentioned earlier in the pod, the question is it going to be worth it to run more plays for Tari when you consider the types of offensive players that you already have elsewhere on this roster? Well, if he goes out and has a strong preseason, that might nudge Ime Udoka in that direction. So what does Tari Eason look like that he's had an offseason to get that leg right? It's potentially a contract year. It's at least a contract preseason leading up to that deadline for the rookie scale extension. We know he's going to play Monday. There's been some talk that, you know, Tari and Steven coming off the long-term injuries, they might take one of these 2 games off because it's 2 and 3 nights. Ime Udoka said today, Sunday, that Monday everyone's going to be available. So what does Tari look like? Is he going to make that leap? I think Jabari, at least in, maybe not statistically, but we both agree that Jabari is going to take a leap this year. I think Tari can take a leap, but exactly how he does it is a little less certain. So I want to see him take that next step. And, you know, the preseason, not everybody's going to be locked in defensively. So yeah, I want to see Tari go out there and eat and put up some numbers.
Good pull on the Tari one for sure, especially given the fact that we are kind of almost up against the wall, right? 15 more days exactly from the time that we're recording this podcast for the Rockets and Tari to potentially come to terms on a rookie scale extension, with the deadline being the day before the regular season starts. I will say this one's kind of low hanging fruit because we've talked about like the starting lineup and who's the fifth and all this. And I know that Ime said that everybody's going to be available, but I don't know if everybody being available equates to he's actually going to finally unveil who his 5th starter is going to be. He might still have everybody available and he might still stagger some guys or do something different. Like, you know, he might be unconventional with the starting lineup or tinker with certain lineups that he wants to see more and experiment and do things like that. So I don't know that it's a guarantee that the starting 5 that we see against the Hawks is going to actually be the starting 5 on opening night of the regular season. So take that with a grain of salt. Don't walk away and be like, this is the Rockets starting 5. We know who the 5th starter is. Like, don't. Just calm those expectations. I will say it's hard not to be looking forward to seeing what does Amen Thompson look like running the offense, right? Because we saw him take some very significant strides last season as a primary ball handler, as a guy that would be responsible for initiating offense at various stages during last season, especially in that absence where Fred VanVleet missed the extended time. And the Rockets essentially just shifted Jalen Green over into the starting point guard role. And then Amen Thompson was the secondary ball handler in that lineup. So seeing what Amen Thompson looks like running the offense full time, because here's the thing, right? Is like, regardless of if Reed does or doesn't start, Amen is your number one primary playmaker. Like, he's going to be the guy walking the ball up 24/7. He's going to be the guy calling sets, initiating actions. He's going to be the extension now of Ime Udoka on the floor. Now, yes, some of that responsibility still falls on KD. Some of it falls on Sengun, but the point guard on the floor is Amen Thompson. We know that he's struggled in the past, especially in the half court, you know, at times with his spacing or how he's navigating a pick and roll or things like that. So just seeing how comfortable he ultimately looks running some of those actions, running a pick and roll with Sengun, or be it KD if you're doing a more unconventional one, or Steven Adams when he comes into the game, just seeing what he looks like. And does he showcase any of that ever growing, ever expanding bag of his, because we know that, there's been a little bit of talk of, Amen looking a lot more comfortable operating out of the mid range, through preseason or through training camp so far, being more confident in taking some of those midi pull up jumpers. And what does that ultimately do for his game, right? Because suddenly if Amen is a guy that you have to actually, get up on a little bit further, you can't just go under the pick every single time. If you have to actually honor him as a shooter, even if it's just from the mid range, what more does that ultimately unlock for his game? So that's what I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot of from Amen Thompson, is just how does he run the offense? How comfortable does he look? And how fluid does the offense look when it's being run through him?
Yeah, and I think that was one of the low-key statements from, I forget what day it was, but one of the training camp practices that really encouraged me when Jabari talked about Amen looking much more fluid at taking those middies off of the pick and roll. Because to me, that's the low-hanging fruit. Sure, he'll get a little bit better as a three-point shooter, but I don't think you're going to see him at, mid-30s at volume, other than, I guess from the corners. But even that's not going to be on super high volume. It's the middies. Those are the more low-hanging fruit that I think are reasonably attainable and can take him to that next level so that he has a counter to when defenders sag against him. And I think especially when it comes to unlocking the double big, it's very tough if you have three non-spacers that all don't have the ball when you're initiating your offense. And so I think if you have Alpi and Steven out there, it's very useful to have Amen initiating those sets, because at least one of the three non-shooters has the basketball. So that is going to draw some attention by default, as opposed to if you're asking Reed or whoever it is to initiate the offense. I guess, Sengun can initiate some as well, but generally you need one of those three, and it's not going to be Steven or Clint. So it's going to be
no love for Point Adams. Come on, Ben.
No.
Hater.
No, it's going to be Amen or Sengun. Amen for the most part, some Alpi, but you need one of those guys to initiate. Otherwise, I do think that the spacing is going to be a little bit too much. So while it's easy to call Reed Sheppard your point guard, and I noticed in the game notes, which really doesn't mean anything, that's just PR, they actually listed Reed Sheppard as the projected starter at point guard for Monday night. We'll see if that ultimately is the case. But even if he is, I agree with you that Amen is going to be the primary ball handler more than Reed. And Reed's going to be playing a bit more off ball. Obviously, they hope that his shooting will help space the floor. But especially to unlock the double big and everything the Rockets want to do, they need Amen Thompson to A, handle the ball and show some progression. But B, beyond that, can he make some plays at a greater rate than he did last year? And hitting those middies, hitting the cutters, if there's some off-ball movement. There's so many things that, I don't want to say Amen was bad at last year, but he can get a lot better at. We know he himself believes he has the ability to get much better. And so, yeah, that's it's not necessarily just game one. That's going to be a theme throughout the preseason and really throughout the overall season. Now that there's no Fred VanVleet security blanket. But yeah, as far as can the Rockets win an NBA championship this year, Amen is the variable that's likely going to determine that. So I agree with you. If he's available and out there in game one, which it sounds like he would be, why not? Why not watch that?
Give me one more thing you're looking forward to, Ben.
Trying to think.
I've got one more. I can go off the rip on this one because it's one.
This is a random one.
Okay, give me.
I want to see, and these are deep cuts, but this is what the preseason is for. I want to see Josh Okogie and JD Davison, because I think there's a world, I'm not expecting them, barring injuries, to be in the day one rotation, but I think these are better depth pieces than most around the league give them credit for. And I think it's especially important now that the Rockets don't have Fred VanVleet and there's all these questions about Reed Sheppard. Look, 22-year-olds who are MVP of the G League don't grow on trees. That's not easy to do. And that's what JD Davison was last year with Boston's G League affiliate. And I asked Ime Udoka about him at Saturday's practice, and they talked about how JD is a big body that can get downhill. He can also guard twos. So in contrast to Reed, who's still a little bit on the light side, JD is someone that is very switchable defensively, offensively. He's sort of like a bowling ball. He can tack the paint. He can make good plays out of the pick and roll. They talked about how they really trust him to make the right decisions, to be able to manipulate defenses. So not everyone that plays well in the G League translates that to the NBA. And by the way, he is 23 now, but he just turned 23 a couple of days ago. Happy birthday to JD. The point is, to do what he did last year in the G League, it's not easy, and that doesn't guarantee success at the NBA level, but at least gives him a chance.
It's a good indicator.
Okogie, if he shoots 35% on threes like he did last season, he's going to be a good NBA rotation player. I don't think he gets enough credit for how good he is as a wing defender. I'm going back 6 years, but the game he had against Harden in the Unguardable Tour was one of the best individual defensive games I've ever seen. And that was rookie Josh Okogie. And he's still just 27 years old. So it's not like he's lost a step. He is a brilliant wing defender. He's got a 7-foot wingspan. So he fits into the Ime Udoka defensive culture. I think the Rockets love him on that end. The question is just, can he shoot at a passable enough level on offense to not be a liability? Last year he did. Last year he shot 35%. Now, that could be an outlier. It could be like the one year that, KJ Martin shot, I think, like 36% on threes here. That obviously wasn't sustainable. So, no, I'm not saying I believe that Josh Okogie is a league average three-point shooter just yet. Although I did ask him a couple of weeks ago, and he said he thinks he can get even better. But, of course, guys are going to say that. Everybody's optimistic this time of year, to go back to something we said earlier. But I do want to see him get some runway in preseason and see how that jump shot looks. Because if he is actually able to shoot in the mid-30s from three, then combine that with his defense, and for a Rockets team that's a little light in the backcourt, he could factor into the equation.
That's a great pull on Josh, and it's certainly a guy that I think, maybe not a staple part of the rotation, but certainly going to get some run here and there, certain matchups, that kind of thing, maybe more so than we originally expected when he did sign, as opposed to him just being a injury insurance depth piece or what have you. Kind of building off that a little bit, we can't see it in its entirety yet because Dorian Finney-Smith isn't healthy, but the lineup that's eventually, and maybe we see it during preseason, maybe we don't. I hope we see it, is I'm so looking forward to seeing the lineup that features Jabari, KD, Tari, Amen, and then it would be DFS would be the fifth of that lineup. That would be the Rockets like death ball defensive lineup where you can switch everything 1 through 5, where you have 5 out spacing, where you only have one non-shooter on the floor, and that would be Amen, and he would likely have the ball in his hands in that lineup. You could run Amen, KD pick and roll sets. There's so much exciting stuff you can do with that lineup. So at least in the interim, you can plug in potentially Josh Okogie, or maybe you plug in Jayshawn Tate if you want to go with an extra deep cut, for that 5th slot to really get that 5 out, switch everything lineup going. I'm really excited to see that version, that defensive lineup out there, because I feel like it's going to cause absolute havoc for other teams at the end of the day. And also, it is an easy one. I just want to see a Rockets win. I know it's preseason. Wins and losses don't matter, but wins are always nicer to talk about, and that's certainly what we want to see happen here. Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure. We are excited for the start of Rockets basketball. Once again, let everybody know where to track you down at, man.
Yep, Ben DuBose on Twitter /Blue Sky, the Logger Line, and the Rockets Wire on the same, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.